This is the story of how a long-delayed U.S. Farm Bill is finally moving through Congress, and why that shift matters for farmers, rural communities, and food prices across the country. It explains what pushed lawmakers to act, what the proposed bill contains, and why the debate around it has become one of the most important agricultural issues in the United States right now. For several years, American agriculture has faced a combination of pressures that rarely arrive all at once, and the result has been a level of financial strain many farmers say they have not seen in decades. Production costs have climbed sharply, equipment purchases have slowed, and many operations are struggling to stay profitable even after strong commodity prices in earlier years. Large tractor and combined sales, for example, dropped roughly 35 to 45% during the previous year, a decline that signals farmers are holding on to older machinery rather than investing in new equipment. That hesitation reflects a larger reality across rural America, where rising input costs for fertilizer, fuel, and machinery have squeezed farm margins and forced difficult decisions about planting, expansion, and long-term planning. Those pressures have not only affected spending decisions, they have also reshaped the agricultural landscape itself. Since 2017, more than 175,000 farms have disappeared in the United States, a number that highlights how quickly the structure of American farming continues to change. Smaller operations have often struggled the most, especially when market volatility combines with higher operating costs and unpredictable weather conditions. Many farmers who remain in the business describe operating on thinner margins while carrying greater financial risk, which is one reason agricultural policy debates in Washington draw such intense attention from the farming community. The growing pressure on farmers eventually brought Congress back to a familiar piece of legislation that shapes much of rural policy in the United States, the Farm Bill. These sweeping bills typically govern agricultural programs, crop insurance, conservation funding, and food assistance programs, and lawmakers traditionally renew them every 5 years. Delays and political disagreements, however, have pushed the current update well beyond its expected timeline, which meant farmers spent years waiting for Congress to finalize the next version. That changed late on March 4, 2026, when the House Agriculture Committee took a significant step forward. After more than 20 hours of debate spread across 2 days, committee members voted 34 to 17 to advance a new proposal called the Farm, Food, and National Security Act of 2026, formally introduced as H.R. 7567. Chairman Glenn G.D. Thompson led the push to move the bill forward and argued the legislation included bipartisan elements designed to address major agricultural challenges. Speaking during the committee process, Thompson told colleagues that the country needs a new farm bill and emphasized the urgency by saying, "We need it now." The vote itself revealed both cooperation and division inside the committee. Every Republican member supported the measure, while 7 Democrats joined them in backing the proposal, which allowed the bill to advance despite broader disagreements between the parties. That combination produced the 34 to 17 result that now sends the legislation to the full House of Representatives for consideration. Committee supporters viewed the outcome as a practical first step towards stabilizing policy for farmers who have been operating in a period of uncertainty. Yet the debate surrounding the bill also exposed clear disagreements about how far Congress should go in supporting agriculture and rural communities. Several Democratic lawmakers criticized the proposal for maintaining many existing policies rather than expanding new spending on programs they believe rural areas need. Ranking Member Angie Craig voiced concerns during the committee debate and argued the proposal largely preserved the status quo, particularly after earlier changes in federal spending priorities. Her criticism reflected a broader argument that some lawmakers want the next farm bill to provide stronger support for nutrition programs, rural infrastructure, and additional farm assistance. Another voice in that criticism came from Representative Shomari Figures, who voted against the measure and explained that he believed the proposal failed to address several key needs in his state. Figures argued the bill does not go far enough to help farmers, rural hospitals, and land-grant universities that depend on federal agricultural funding and research programs. Those concerns show how farm legislation often becomes a balancing act between agricultural support, food assistance, and rural development priorities that affect millions of Americans beyond the farming SEC itself. While lawmakers debated policy details in Washington, major farm organizations watched the process closely and responded quickly after the committee vote. Leaders in several agricultural groups welcomed the progress and urged Congress to move the bill forward as quickly as possible. American Farm Bureau President Zippy Duvall described the current challenges facing agriculture as headwinds not seen in a generation, and he encouraged House leaders to schedule a vote so the bill could advance to the next stage of the legislative process. Commodity groups representing specific sectors of agriculture also weighed in, often focusing on the provisions most relevant to their industries. Dwayne Statler, president of the National Pork Producers Council, praised language aimed at overriding California's Proposition 12, a state law that regulates housing conditions for pigs whose pork is sold in California. Pork producers have argued that the law creates costly requirements for farmers across the country, even those located far from the state. Statler welcomed the bill's effort to address the issue and described it as a form of regulatory relief that could help stabilize the industry. Support also came from leaders representing major crop producers. American Soybean Association President Scott Metzger highlighted provisions that build on earlier investments in agricultural credit, conservation programs, and research initiatives that farmers depend on for long-term sustainability. National Corn Growers Association President Jed Bauer similarly welcomed parts of the bill designed to strengthen crop insurance and expand support for innovation in agriculture. For many of these organizations, the committee vote signaled progress after years of uncertainty surrounding farm policy. Inside the legislation itself, the proposal combines several familiar agricultural programs with a number of highly debated additions. Core safety net programs such as crop insurance remain central to the bill because they help farmers recover from disasters like droughts, floods, or sudden market downturns. Conservation programs that encourage soil protection and environmental stewardship also remain part of the funding structure, continuing policies that have developed over decades of farm legislation. One of the most controversial sections involves what supporters often call the Save Our Bacon Act. This provision would limit the ability of individual states to enforce certain animal housing standards on pork produced in other states, effectively targeting California's Proposition 12 regulations. Pork producers argue the change would protect interstate commerce and prevent one state from setting production rules for farmers nationwide. Critics of the provision, however, believe it weakens animal welfare standards and removes authority from states that want stricter agricultural regulations. Another debated section deals with pesticide regulation and liability rules for manufacturers. The proposal would prevent states from requiring pesticide warning labels that differ from federal standards and would limit certain lawsuits against pesticide companies when their products meet federal regulatory requirements. Supporters argue this creates a consistent national standard that protects farmers from confusing or conflicting rules. Opponents counter that the measure could restrict the ability of individuals or states to hold manufacturers accountable if health concerns arise. Energy policy, another important topic for farmers and rural economies, produced its own dispute during the committee markup process. Many agricultural groups support expanding year-round sales of E15 gasoline, a fuel blend containing 15% ethanol that uses corn as a primary feedstock. Biofuel advocates argue that permanent nationwide access to E15 would strengthen rural economies, increase demand for corn, and provide consumers with additional fuel options. During the House Agriculture Committee debate, Representative Eric Sorensen attempted to add language that would allow year-round E15 sales nationwide. The amendment, however, was ruled out of order during the markup process, which meant the House version of the Farm Bill does not currently include the provision. That decision disappointed biofuel supporters. Yet the issue is far from settled because Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman John Boozman has indicated the Senate version of the Farm Bill may include an E15 expansion. Because of that difference, ethanol policy could become one of the central points of negotiation if both chambers pass their own versions of the legislation. Conference committees typically reconcile disagreements between House and Senate bills, and those negotiations often determine which provisions survive in the final law. In this case, lawmakers may need to resolve disputes not only over ethanol policy, but also over nutrition spending, conservation funding, and crop insurance details, and that process will shape the final text sent to the president. For farm families, the stakes are concrete and immediate because a completed farm bill would lock in funding and rules for the next 5 years for programs that touch planting decisions, disaster relief, conservation practices, and food systems. Farm Bureau leaders argue that after years of delays, farmers desperately need the support, and that message drove the push in committee to move the bill forward. The result, if enacted, would provide predictable policies for producers and for rural economies that depend on them. This is the story of a long-delayed law taking its first formal step through Congress, and the outcome will matter every time a farmer checks input costs, insures a crop, or makes a planting decision. Lawmakers have shown they can reach partial agreement, but the differences that remain will determine how much relief and how much change farmers actually receive when the final bill becomes law.